So I was 21 years old and I woke up one morning. I was still half asleep, doing what we all do, especially at 21 years old. I was scrolling through social media before I had even opened both of my eyes. And I started seeing this name over and over again on my feed. Post after post, it said, "Rest in peace, Dawn. You will always be remembered, Dawn. We love you, Dawn." And I remember lying there thinking, who is Dawn? Why is everyone on my feed talking about her? And then I scrolled to a post with her picture, and my heart dropped straight into my stomach because Dawn was my friend, my high school friend. And so I called up a mutual friend of ours. I remember shaking. I was just trying to understand what had happened. And she told me the story piece by piece. She said that the night before, Dawn had been stood up by a guy that she was dating. And so Dawn's best friend, Diana, said to her, "Just come with me." And she took Dawn to this local Starbucks where every Thursday night that summer, a bunch of guys on motorcycles would show up to show off their bikes. And so a couple of guys they struck up a conversation with the two girls. And Diana, I mean, you know how it is when you're young and you're a little reckless and the night just feels electric and you want a sense of adventure, right? So Diana got excited about the idea of hopping on the back of one of the bikes and riding into the city just to grab a bite to eat, and then they would come right back. But Dawn, she did not want to go. She had a bad feeling in her gut. She actually resisted. But what I was told was that under the pressure of the moment, the pressure of her friend, the pressure of the night, the pressure of being an easily persuadable 21-year-old, she ended up getting on the back of the bike. And so Dawn was up ahead with her driver, and Diana was riding with a different guy behind them. And as Diana crossed the George Washington Bridge, she saw something in the middle of the road. She saw a pink jacket, Dawn's pink jacket, laid out in the middle of the pavement. And so she rode up ahead and she found Dawn's body lying there. And so Diana jumped off of her bike and ran to her. Dawn in that moment was still alive, barely, but alive, and in her best friend's arms. And the last words that Dawn ever said, the very last words that left her body were, "I love you, Dee, and it's not your fault." And she died in her friend's arms a moment later. And so I remember hearing all of this and something in me just like cracked open. And I remember thinking to myself, Ayelet, you have never lost someone close to you before. I remember thinking this thought as clear as this conversation we're having right here, right now. The thought said, Ayelet, you have been alive for 21 years, but you haven't really been living. And something in me said, you're about to start now. If not for yourself, then for Dawn. And I grieved her hard. And somewhere inside that grief, something else happened too. I had my spiritual awakening at 21 years old. It was an awakening that eventually led me to spend 6 years in India and then 8 years in Israel, looking for something that maybe I couldn't name then, but I learned a lot about grief. Grief cracked my heart wide open that year, and it taught me in a way nothing else ever could have how to actually live while I was still alive. And so I tell you that story because I think a lot of us are walking around half asleep in our own lives, not feeling our feelings fully, not letting ourselves go through portals of deep emotion, almost kind of like we're waiting for some kind of a wake-up call. And I don't want that for you. I don't want it to take a loss for you to start living like you mean it. And so today I want to talk to you about grief, not as a problem to fix, but as one of the most sacred, most transformative experiences a human being can walk through. So let's walk through it together today. Let's dive in. Becoming becoming a co-creator with the Creator is your birthright. Together, we'll journey into your deepest authenticity. Because the more you align with who you truly are, the more effortlessly you call in the life that you desire and deserve. And most importantly, the more you step into your soul's highest purpose. Welcome to the Manifestation Method podcast, your number one source for Kabbalistic manifestation. Here we combine the ancient wisdom of Kabbalah, modern psychology, and quantum physics to help you achieve real, tangible manifestation results with my proven Abra method. I'm Ayelet Polonsky, and I'm here to guide you on your journey of manifesting a life that is aligned, expansive, and deeply connected to your highest self through the sacred energetic mechanics of Kabbalistic manifestation. To learn how to use Kabbalistic manifestation to transform your life from the inside out, go to ayeletpolonsky.com or download the Manifestation Method app. Let's open the gates of manifestation together. Okay, so we're here to talk about grief, but not the way that you've heard it talked about before, not the 5 stages and not, time heals all and not like little inspirational quotes that make you sometimes feel worse instead of better because you feel like the quotes don't actually get you. And so today I want to talk about grief as something sacred, as something that might actually be one of the most spiritual experiences a human being can have. And so I want to walk you through a few things, first being why grief isn't a problem to solve and what happens the moment you stop trying to solve it. There is real juicy magic here. And I want to bring in this idea from the Jewish tradition, from sitting Shiva. I think this tradition holds one of the most profound teachings on presence that I've ever come across. And I'm also going to cover the different kinds of grief, because grief is so much wider than death, right? Some of you have been grieving things you don't even have language for. And of course, I'll go into this kind of like Kabbalistic idea of how the heart actually physically expands through heartbreak, like structurally expands, and then by the end, I really want you to walk away, not trying to necessarily get rid of your grief, but actually knowing how to hold it. So that's my intention. Let's see if we can cover all of that in one episode, right? But where I want to start is by sharing that somewhere along the way, and most of us don't even remember when, right? We all absorbed a belief that grief is like a problem, that it's something to move through as fast as possible or something to heal from so that we can get back to, in quotes, real life, right? But what if grief is real life? Yeah, and I really want you to sit with that question for a second. What if grief is real life? I mean, let's face it, death and rebirth. These are portals, these are cycles that we're all going to experience many times in one lifetime and across many lifetimes. And so what if grief is not necessarily the interruption to your story, but what if it's actually one of the truest, realest chapters of your whole story? What if grief is simply what love feels like when it doesn't have anywhere familiar to land anymore? Right? And what if grief is the portal to experience life and being alive more fully? Right? Because think about it, every single one of us knows grief in some form. Some of you may be grieving people who have died. Maybe you're grieving a marriage that ended, or maybe it's a version of a marriage that you thought you'd have. Maybe some of you are grieving the child you never had, or the version of yourself that disappeared or after something traumatic happened and you lost some of your innocence, right? The innocence that you lost way too early. Or maybe you're grieving the dream, the longing that just didn't happen, right? Or the friendship that slowly drifted instead of ending in a clean way, right? Maybe you're grieving a community that you were once a part of And then maybe the community just changed on you, or you changed, or maybe the home you had to leave, or the country you had to leave, or the health that you used to take for granted. Or, for many of us, I know we're grieving the parent that we never actually had, even though they were sitting right there at the dinner table, right? You know what I mean, if you know what I mean. So grief wears 1,000 faces, and underneath every single one of them is the exact same sentence. Short, brief, to the point. I loved. I loved. You cannot grieve what you have never loved. And so here's the reframe that I want to give you right at the top, right? Your grief is not evidence that something has gone wrong in you. Your grief is evidence that your heart was and is very much alive. And I think something that so many of us do, and I just wish we would stop doing it, is we apologize for grieving. We confuse grieving with weakness, and we tell ourselves that we should be further along by now, or we shouldn't still be crying about the same thing, or we should have accepted it already, right? But here's the thing. The soul does not operate on a timeline, and it never has. The soul moves like seasons. It moves like tides. It moves like the moon. And that means that there are days that you feel completely whole. And then, one song comes on the radio, or a smell, or an empty chair at the table, or a photograph that you weren't even looking for appears. And then suddenly your whole body remembers. Before your mind has even caught up with what's happening, your body remembers. And you feel it. You feel the pain. You feel the longing. You feel the grief. And that is not you failing. That's love having memory, right? Love remembers, and it remembers through your body, not just through your mind. And so I think we've been taught that healing means that we reach a place where grief disappears completely. And I just don't actually think that's true. I believe that healing is actually reaching a place where grief no longer frightens you, right? Where you stop treating your own tears like they are some sort of intruders. When we start, instead of asking, when will this end? We start asking, okay, what is this grief trying to keep alive inside of me? Because grief, and this is important, right? Grief is deeply protective. What do I mean by grief is deeply protective? I mean that it refuses to let love become meaningless. And so it basically stands guard. Your grief stands guard, saying, this mattered. This thing changed me. This person, this experience changed me. And this belongs in my story, and I won't let you erase it. That is what grief as a sacred teacher is trying to tell you. And the problem is our culture is obsessed with moving on, but the soul is not interested in moving on. The soul wants to move deeper. And so the moving on versus moving deeper, I see as two really completely different directions. Because moving on, it asks you to forget, whereas moving deeper asks you to just remember differently. Not to remember with like clenched fists and like contraction, but with open hands, ready to receive the deepening that grief is here to let you experience. Okay. And so, I find it really amazing how the Jewish tradition, what do? When someone loses a person they love, we don't just tell them to be strong or everything will be okay. And we don't just tell them to stay positive. No, we sit. I mean, it's literally called sitting Shiva. And so we lower ourselves. We sit on the floor. We sit on stools. We sit close to the earth. And our friends come in quietly. And nobody's trying to rush anything or fix anything. And nobody tries to rescue the mourner from their own feelings. And in this space of sitting Shiva, presence becomes the medicine. And so I find that like so extraordinary because I think culturally we've really lost that. You know, we think the kindest thing to do for someone in pain is to somehow help them like feel better as fast as possible. But maybe the kindest thing that we can do for someone is just refusing to let them carry it alone. And honestly, I think that's what God does with us too. I don't think God always removes our grief. I think sometimes God just kind of like sits beside it. And God holds the parts of us that we can't yet hold ourselves. And I think this is where mystics come in because they share an idea that genuinely like really changed how I relate to my own brokenheartedness. I find it so fascinating. They share that every heartbreak expands the vessel of the heart, which, you know, sounds beautiful, but until you actually really think about how expansion happens, you really get this because nothing stretches or expands without first being pulled. You know, nothing grows without first creating space and making room. And so when your heart cracks, it's not falling apart. It's becoming large enough to hold more love than it could ever have held before. Right? I mean, Rabbi Nachman, the Jewish mystic, he says, there is nothing as whole as a broken heart. And the mystic Rumi, he shares, you know, the cracks are where the light comes in, right? The cracks in our heart and our heartbreak is where the light comes in. And I just find it so like, wow. Like, have you ever noticed that the people with the gentlest eyes are usually the ones who have carried the deepest grief? That the most compassionate people you know are usually the ones who really know suffering intimately? Hi, Ayelet here. I just wanted to pop in and say I am so excited to officially introduce the Manifestation Method portal, membership, and app. This is your home for all things Kabbalistic manifestation. You'll get access to my monthly live workshops, soul deep hypno activations and attunements, all of our manifestation courses, and our global community of manifestors. And the best part? It's just $26 a month. That's less than a latte a week. Come manifest alongside me and start creating the life you desire and deserve. Head over to ayeletpolonsky.com to join us. You know, I know for me, the safest people in my life are not the ones who have learned to escape pain. They're the ones who stopped running from it. This is such a profound internalization. All right, so grieve, when you actually welcome it instead of resisting it, it slowly transforms you. It softens judgment and it dissolves your certainty about how things should go, you know, so in a way, in a big way, it teaches humility and it awakens compassion because it reminds you that every single person that you pass on the street is carrying invisible losses, you know? And so this is exactly why kindness matters so much, is because you really genuinely never know what someone is silently mourning or grieving. You know, maybe someone listening to this episode right now is grieving something that you've never said out loud. Maybe it's a marriage or a diagnosis. Maybe it's a betrayal or a dream or a parent or a friendship. Maybe it's an identity, right? Or maybe you're grieving the person you thought you were supposed to become by now. You know, and so if that is you, I really invite you to hear this. Nothing has gone wrong because your heart is still aching. Your tears are not proof that you're stuck or that you should have moved on by now, and your grief is not a lack of faith. Sometimes grief is faith. You know, because every tear, I see it as like every tear is quietly whispering to me, this mattered. And anything that mattered deeply deserves its fair share of mourning. There's this reminds me of a Hebrew word that I think is important to bring into this, and that word is rachamim. Rachamim. It means compassion. And it comes from the exact same root as the word rechem, which means womb. So rachamim is compassion, and rechem is womb. And so compassion is womb-like. And the womb is nurturing, and it doesn't rush you, and it doesn't demand that you hurry up and heal or transform, and it doesn't shame you for still being in it, right? It simply makes enough space for something fragile to become whole in its own time. And so, can we become that kind of presence for ourselves? And instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? Can we start asking, how do I hold this feeling with more tenderness, more compassion, more understanding? Because I see it as like healing was never the absence of grief. It's not like one or the other. I'm no longer grieving, therefore I am healed. No, I see it as healing is discovering that your grief no longer lives in a lonely place, right? That it now lives inside of a heart that is spacious enough to hold both sorrow and joy simultaneously, right? Both absence and gratitude simultaneously, both tears and laughter simultaneously, both endings and beginnings simultaneously. And I think that's one of life's just greatest mysteries, right? The heart never actually chooses between grief and love. It carries both always at the same time. That is living alive. And so the deeper your capacity to grieve, the deeper your capacity to grieve, the deeper your capacity to love. And the deeper your willingness to let your heart break, the greater your ability to keep it open in the face of heartbreak. Right? So let's like widen this out for a minute, because I think grief is much bigger than the way we usually talk about it. There's so many different flavors and types of grief, not just the grief of losing someone you care about or love, but there's anticipatory grief, right? The grief that starts before the loss even happens. For example, the type of grief that happens when a parent is slowly disappearing into memory loss, or when a marriage is unraveling thread by thread before your eyes. Oof. Or when you're in a doctor's office and all of a sudden the doctor's tone changes and you can feel the tension in the air. Right? You start mourning while the person or the thing is still right there in front of you. And then everyone wonders why you seem fine at the funeral, but you've been grieving for years already, maybe. And so you're exhausted before anyone else even knows there's something to grieve. Right? And there's also what's called disenfranchised grief. It's the grief that the world doesn't really know what to do with it, or they don't know how to make room for it. For example, a miscarriage, the loss of a pet, right? Or a job that you had that was tangled up with your entire identity. Or let's say an estranged parent who dies, and now you're not just grieving the person, but you're grieving every version of the relationship you always hoped you'd eventually get, but you never did. So it's the kind of grief that tends to happen in private, right? Whether it's in the car or in the shower, or at 3 a.m. when the house goes quiet. And then there's collective grief, right? The grief of a whole community, a whole people. It's watching a city flood, or watching a generation disappear, or it's what happens after a war. It's enormous, and yet it shapes entire cultures. It becomes kind of like it gets woven into the songs that people sing and the stories that they tell. And honestly, it shapes the things that they never talk about out loud, and kind of just pass down from generation after generation in silence. So to be human, like truly human, is to grieve. And here's the thing about grief is it's not passive. It's actually asking something of you. Grief asks you to sit with the pain instead of like run away from it. It asks you to put the phone down, put down the bottle of wine, put down the busyness, and to Actually let yourself feel the weight of having loved someone. It asks for radical honesty, you telling yourself, this mattered to me, this loss is real, and I don't have to pretend that I'm fine. But I think it also asks us something much harder and deeper. It asks us to let ourselves be witnessed. So many books on grief talk about grieving in community, grieving with others. Grief was never meant to be carried alone. And that's, it's the entire reason why every human culture across all of history, we've built rituals around loss, whether it's funerals or wakes or Shivas, because grief needs a container. It needs another person to sit there and say, I see what you're carrying and I'm not going anywhere. And you don't have to pretend that the weight is nothing. And I think when someone genuinely, truly offers you that, right? No fixing, no rushing, no, oh, everything happens for a reason. Then something shifts, right? You realize that you can bear the unbearable. And it's not because the weight lifts off of you, but it's because the weight finally is shared. Right. And so really, I think grief can be one of the greatest teachers you've ever had. No, and I don't mean like what you read on inspirational posters. It's a teacher in a way that it cracks you open and actually changes your vision. After real loss, what happens is the ordinary parts of life start to really glow with a different type of meaning and significance and has depth to it. It's in the little things. It's in the cup of tea someone hands you without asking, or a hand that reaches for yours, or the fact that the light is still kind of falling through the window at that exact angle and you're still here to see it. For me, oftentimes I'll just sit outside in my backyard or anywhere in nature and I'll listen to the wind rustling through the leaves and I'll feel the spirit of those who I've loved and lost speaking to me through the wind. And there's a real sweetness to that. People who have grieved, they deeply carry a tenderness towards life that wasn't there before. They've been to the underside of love. They've been to the places where it hurts the most, and they have survived that. And so they know something true about what actually matters and what doesn't. And so they stop, they stop sweating the small stuff. Because grief taught their body that time is short and presence is the whole entire point. And so this doesn't necessarily make loss worth it. Nothing makes loss worth it. But grief is not only loss. Grief, it eventually becomes an inheritance. It becomes a depth of feeling available to you, specifically because you walked through the dark and came out the other side, still carrying the love that put you there in the first place. And that is radical. So, yeah, this is a lot and this might be heavy, so if you're grieving something right now, I want you to hear this before I close. You're not broken. You're not doing grief wrong. There is no timeline and there's no correct way to carry the weight of having loved something. Right? There is only the slow, sacred work of learning to carry it, of letting it teach you what it knows. And so in that way, grief is not the darkness. It becomes like the echoes, the place where laughter used to live and it's still vibrating against the walls of your heart, right? It's love that's arriving at a home that's suddenly empty, and maybe the heart was never meant to stay unbroken. Maybe it was meant like soil, right? To crack you open so that something holy could actually grow. So remember that a cracked heart lets more light in. A broken heart holds more compassion. And a grieving heart is simply a heart that loved with everything it had. So don't rush your becoming. Don't apologize for the ache. Really honor what your grief is trying to tell you. Because beneath every heartbreak and every goodbye and beneath every ounce of longing, love still remains. It is waiting, it is breathing, it is expanding you. Right? So grief was never the opposite of love. It might actually just be one of love's holiest forms. And so I bless us all, may we all have the courage to grieve what is real, and may we have the tenderness to walk each other through the sorrow instead of around it. And may every loss we carry eventually reveal what love has been trying to teach us all along, right? That nothing truly loved is ever wasted. It just changes form. And so I want to leave you with a quote that I love about grief, and it says, grief is the price of love, and love is always, always worth the price. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this met you somewhere where it brought some comfort to your grieving heart. And if you know someone who is currently grieving, please pay this episode forward, share it with them, let it meet them in a place that can crack their heart open further, expand their heart, and open up space for a whole lot more love. See you in the next episode. Here's to your rising. If you enjoyed this episode, let's keep the conversation going inside the Manifestation Method Portal app, your #1 destination for Kabbalistic manifestation. Inside, you'll unlock the secrets of manifestation through my proven Abra method, rooted in Kabbalah, psychology, and quantum physics, designed to help you manifest real, tangible results from the inside out. Join our global community of manifestors, explore our signature courses, monthly live manifestation workshops with me, Ayelet, and access our transformational hypno activations and attunements to rewire limiting beliefs and align with your soul's purpose. The app is available now on the Apple App Store and Google Play. To sign up, head over to ayeletpolonsky.com. Becoming a co-creator with the Creator is your birthright. Let's manifest the life you desire and deserve together.